What have I done? And finally, they get to the day where they have the baby, and the chemistry's back. It's back, right? And what I mean by that is that the family and the friends, they show up, and they drop off all the gifts, and they say, oh, he looks like you, he looks like you, and they leave. And now those two are in a hospital room together with a real, live, living, not sleeping human being. This is reality. And that was scene one, right? And at some point they decide that the chemistry works so well that with baby number one, that why don't we have 2, 3, 4 more, right? And at some point, he's going to go back to work. He's sleep deprived, and so he doesn't know what she's thinking, and she doesn't know what he's thinking, and they're both thinking, I married the wrong person. And so they get together. They're out and about with their friends because they got stress in their life, and so they're out and about, and maybe they run into somebody at the bar, or they run into somebody at the restaurant for the friend, and they meet this person, or maybe it's somebody they went to high school with that's of the opposite sex, and so they get together, and it seems innocent enough, but maybe eventually the wedding bands slip off. And maybe they have a kiss, and man, fireworks. So what happens? Well, they do what more than half of couples do today. They split up. They're left scratching their heads thinking, what went wrong? What happened? I thought if I could just find Mr. Right, if I could find Mr. Right, or I could find Mrs. Right, then everything would work out. I thought that was the way that it was supposed to work. And they end up in a place called divorce. I think it was the great theologian, country singer who used to say, going through the big D, and I don't mean Dallas, right? No fans of the, okay, we'll keep going. 90s country, okay, you didn't know you hear that today, all right, keep going, stay on point. We dive into what Paul has to talk about here in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And let me just say, I don't know your situation very well. I don't know all of your situations and what you're in, but I do know this. The God I read about in the Bible is the one who can heal. And He's the one who can redeem. And He can save. And that's what we're going to read about a little bit this morning in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And so here's where we are. We're going to begin in verse 10. Paul, he's doing a little Q&A kind of with the people of the Corinthian church. They've sent him a list of questions, and he's given them responses. He's writing this letter in response, but we don't have their questions, right? We don't have their questions, so we're going to have to come up with those. So their first question, of course, is it's about sex. And the second question is about marriage and divorce and remarriage. And so Paul, he's going to dive into that. Let's go to verse 10. Here's what it says. To the married, I give this charge. Not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And the husband should not divorce his wife. And so Paul, he just says it. He just comes right out and says it. He comes out and he puts it on the table and he says, this is the case. And at this point right now, Paul is talking to two Christians who are married to each other. They're married, a Christian husband and a Christian wife. And he's saying it's not good for either of them to seek divorce. Okay? Now, when we're reading the Bible, there are a lot of questions that you and I should ask. Right? So we're going to ask questions today about why Paul said what he said. Why did Paul say that? That's our big question. Why would Paul tell a husband and a wife to stay together? Why would he say, do not seek divorce? Why would Paul say that? Now, we'll see in verse 10 that he says, not I, but the Lord. That's what he said. Paul is basically saying, this isn't coming from me. Okay? This is coming from Jesus. Jesus Christ. You know Him. You have a relationship with Him. You're already Christians. Remember, this is not to people who don't know Jesus. This is to the church in Corinth. They've already given their life to Christ. Right? So I'm referring to something that you've already heard. Jesus told him this to begin with. Right? If you go, keep your place in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and you go back to the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew 19, Matthew